It's ad break time. I am proud to announce that the Beyond Solitaire podcast is sponsored by Central Michigan University's Center for Learning Through Games and Simulations. This summer and going into the fall, CLGS has some seriously exciting projects in the works. On July 8th, they're going to launch a campaign featuring 2 games, Witch Hunt 1649 by Martha McGill and Making History by Nicholas Proctor. Both of these games are exciting in the classroom and beyond, and actually both have been discussed by the designers on this podcast. So keep an eye out on July 8th, and let's get on with the show. Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm here with a very special podcast episode. We are doing a Night Witches check-in with the designers, David and me, and very importantly, the artist, Ian O'Toole. How are you gentlemen doing today?
Good.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. Slight hesitation.
Yeah.
So David and I are up at our usual early times, and it is the polar opposite is evening for Ian. So we have coordinated across continents to make this happen. Because people ask this constantly, Ian, how far are we on the art for Night Witches?
Eternal question. Literally. We are. What do you want? Do you want a percentage? Is that what we're looking at?
You know what? If I don't even know the percentage, so sure, for my clinical interest.
I would say we are 85% of the way there.
Hell yeah, that's a good percentage. That's a B. You know.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I'm gonna go and post on all the socials that Liz Davidson said that Ian O'Toole is a B artist.
He gets a B.
That's how I'm gonna interpret that comment.
That'll be like the clickbait that makes people watch this.
You gotta have 5 reasons why.
Yeah, there you go.
You gotta have a list.
5 things we all did this week.
Well, the good news is that all of the difficult work is done, which is figuring out how to present it and figuring out how to represent the mechanisms and all that sort of stuff. All of that, which is really the meat of it. All of that's done. There's a couple of things obviously still need to be updated. Right now, it's just thematic stuff really that's being finished off. So illustrations and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Yay!
There.
So I know you did like a lot of research for our game in order to illustrate it in a way that seemed good to you. So what kinds of work were you doing while you were off in the wilds before you appeared with our maps and our cards and all?
Wow, all sorts. Most of it's obviously visual research for, just trying to find anything, documents, maps, photographs, anything that's relevant. We have 10 missions in the game, and they all take place, at different times of year and different locations and all that sort of stuff. So it was pretty important to me to try and do my best to represent them as accurately as possible, even though some of the missions are literally just over fields, or there's no real. It's not like you're looking for a particular steeple or something like that on the map. All of the maps, for instance, are still, as much as I could figure out, and there's some vagueness about locations and things like that. Obviously, not everything is as documented as I would love it to be. But all of the maps are real sections of countryside. Some of them are based on historical maps. Some of them are based on just literally me kind of looking at where they took off from and kind of where they went, and knowing that they crossed a particular river, for instance. So just choosing an interesting part of that river, which is kind of, likely that, they were in and around this area. So there's a lot of that sort of stuff. I also looked at a lot of operational maps and operational documents. Very little is available that actually is relevant to the Night Witches themselves. But there's lots of other stuff around, campaigns that they were a part of or on the periphery of, and stuff like that. And also, just so much stuff. Also, just things like just Soviet Army operational documents and things like that. So, when you see the maps, there are like little scrolls of non-specific things that kind of look like somebody's drawn half a map or made a note of something. All of that's real. All of that's actually taken from scans of real sketches that, in most cases, not Night Witches made specifically that we know of, but that were really used. A lot of the textures are from actual documents and things like that. So there's just a lot of it's not world building because it's the real world, but it's kind of trying to create a sense of authenticity, I guess, is kind of what I'm after. And some of that I think is very obvious when you look at it, but also things like the maps being based on real parts of the countryside. I guess a player might not realize that, but I still think there's importance, especially with something something that's historically based. I still think it's very important I feel I need to do my best to sort of represent these things as well as possible.
Ian, have you worked on a war game or a war themed game before or game that you would classify in that genre?
Let me think.
I can't think of anything.
No.
Nothing comes to mind. So did this present, like when you were researching this, did this present new challenges that you hadn't? I mean, you do a lot of historical, games that touch different historical periods. So I guess how is this different or similar from some of that research that you typically do?
That is a really good question. I think so. I haven't done a lot war games before, but I have actually done quite a lot of military research before, because in a previous life, I used to design. Part of what I did was design museum displays, and I did design entire galleries of military museums here in Western Australia, which involved a massive amount of research. And I find that military research in particular is very much a case of comparing different sources, and often conflicting sources, and very often, most of the time, incomplete sources, and trying to get as clear a picture as you can. It's a little different here because we're trying to kind of tell a story. There's like a narrative part to it, and there's we're trying to kind of immerse the player and get them emotionally involved, which is something that a museum does sort of, but in a very different way. It's a very different thing. But as regards how it's different from other historical games, there tends to be more stuff to go through. Right, there's a lot of declassified documents. There's a lot of just things to look through to try and find like little bits of relevant information and stuff like that. And I guess also there's kind of a feeling of responsibility as well in trying to represent things as well as we can, but for the most part, not be flippant with details. Like there's a lot of stuff that we could kind of get away with yada-ing a little bit, and not many people would notice, and maybe not anybody would notice, to be honest. There's a lot of details we could kind of brush over, but I kind of feel reticent to do to do that in this particular case, because we are talking about real people and we're asking the player to imagine themselves in that position and stuff like that. So yeah, so there's definitely a sense of wanting to do the story justice, I think.
Makes sense. So one thing that's also been kind of fun is that you're doing art for a game that I can also tell that you've played, because you've made like little adjustments to gameplay that fit kind of, it's like, in a way you're kind of like our third designer now.
I don't know about that.
Well, a little dev on your end. So how much of games that you're illustrating do you play? And at what point do you make decisions about little things that need to change?
I play all of them at some stage in the development. Sometimes at multiple stages. It kind of depends on the game and how complex it is and how long that development cycle is. But as much as possible, before I start to do anything, I kind of need to play the game, because it's the quickest way to understand everything, which is something I need to do. It is worth mentioning that on my first playtest of Night Witches, I got all the pages mixed up, and I tried to do the last mission first. And part of my feedback was, guys, this game's really hard.
Yeah.
It gets easier and simpler as you go.
It's like
the Benjamin Button game. Like,
that's right. Yeah. Anyway, once I got that figured out. It's super important to play it, because in any prototype or any game, there's two things that are linked but also distinct. So there's the rules, and there's the expression of those rules. And there's a lot of variability. There's usually, most of the time, there's a lot of different ways that you could approach expressing the same rules, right? So you could have, an easy example is if there's currency in the game, you can have tokens, you can have a dial that tracks your money, you can have tracks, there's all sorts of different things you can do, none of which actually change the rules. They're all just different ways of expressing those rules. So that's really the first thing that that's what the first play testing is about. It's about trying to think about not necessarily alternate ways to do it, although often that's the case. It's just kind of looking at and assessing it and saying, is the way that we're doing it the best way to bring across everything that we want to bring across? And what I like to try and do as much as possible is make these things multitask. So if we can come up with a way of handling a certain rule that reduces setup, that makes it more intuitive, that makes it maybe more thematic, or maybe just more fun, or introduces like a cool component that has table presence, all these things try and fold into whatever we do to represent the rules usually without changing the rules themselves.
So inadvertently, you actually solved one of the things that was bugging me the most about our game, which was going to the stopwatch. I didn't like representing recovery time in specific time numbers, because we needed to represent that was happening, but also the actual time intervals that the Night Witches were using were so tight that it was hard to do numerically in a game. So you came up with the stopwatch. So how did you end up there? I'm really glad that we did.
So the stopwatch is a physical component that looks like a pocket watch, that has a little dial on it that works like a clock. Basically, it just points to different values, and as you move through each mission, you treat it like a stopwatch, right? You tick the watch down until your time runs out. It's pretty much what I was talking about. We're trying as much as possible to put people in the cockpit as much as we can do that. It's a very difficult thing to do, and it's impossible. But as much as possible to try and evoke some of those emotions. So the tightness of time, fuel is another thing that we ended up changing. As it just seemed that, I mean, to me, just having, I mean, it's in some ways it's a very obvious thing because it's a stopwatch. It's an era specific stopwatch that many pilots would have actually used. So it's one of those things that kind of does double duty. It evokes some emotion that we're looking for. It's intuitive because it just we know how a stopwatch works. And it also adds a cool component.
Yeah, I think the similar thing you mentioned, it was the way the fuel works. So Liz and I had, we had used in our prototype this track that it was fine, it was functional, but every single time at the end of the track there was confusion by players whether the last space counted as a fuel, didn't count as a fuel. And you just, I don't know that you even knew that, but you switched it to where each fuel or each bomb is its own little token. And so it becomes immediately clear to the player, you either do or don't have something to spend, right? So that was another really nice, of course, it's much more physically satisfying to handle little wooden bits that look like bombs than it is, move a token down a track. But that was another amazing sort of like very minor, like nobody's ever going to know. The players won't know any difference. But for us, it was immediately impactful seeing that change.
Yeah, player boards are often where I do most of my meddling with prototypes. Because prototypes, and this is great actually for me if a prototype is just a bunch of tracks and places to hold things, because that just gives me a whole bunch of freedom with, okay, well, what could this be? How can I represent this? And the player board for Night Witches gave us a really nice opportunity to kind of zoom in on what we see, what we're representing in the map, so that you're actually seeing the plain, you're seeing a bit more of the countryside and the drama of the moment. But it also allows us to do that really satisfying thing that we like to do in games, which is put little pieces in their place, and for them to make sense, right? You put your wood in your wood shed, and you put your bricks in your in your whatever you do with bricks. I don't know. But so yeah, once I kind of thought about that, then it seemed obvious that well, fuel, where does fuel go? It goes in the engine. And again, because fuel is thematically running out, it made sense to have a supply and then just each round take away from that supply. So you've really got a sense of, like, the time ticking down, you've got a sense of urgency, right? The bombs are the same. So the bombs are physical, like little wooden pieces that you put on the wings where they would actually go. And then when you use them, you remove them. So it's again, it's a very, just looking for intuitive ways to do these things. When you put fuel on an engine and you take it away every turn, people internalize that really, really quick. Same with bombs. If you put bombs on the wing, they immediately at least know the general idea of what's going on. You don't really have to explain much to them.
I also thought it was very interesting the way that you wrapped in damage and taking damage into that system. Because, in our original prototype board, David, it was beautiful work. You did great. We had just little spots that you would block off with damage tokens to indicate that something had been messed up. But of course, you couldn't see where the damage spots are if those slots were full. So you were having to move stuff around all the time. Is representing damage. I feel like that must be a common part of your job. But well, you sure. Would know how to solve these problems better than I. But what made you arrive at just having red pieces as removable pieces for damage?
It just kind of so once I arrived at the idea, which I felt was very early, I felt, well, this is definitely the way to go, which is the player board represents your plane, and as I talked about, you put the pieces on. So there's, again, also, there's a refreshing refitting phase in the game. So it also feels thematic to put the things onto your plane, right? As it does to take them off your plane. So that seemed undeniably the way to go. But then, obviously, because of the way the game worked, there was a problem. So it really just becomes a problem-solving exercise at that stage. So it's like I think we need to do it this way. So how do we make the rules understandable to do that? Yeah. So what I arrived at is, instead of blocking off spaces on a track, which is essentially removing the opportunity to do something, we just have one of the bombs and some of the fuel is a different color. It's red, and the idea is that in the normal course of things, they're the last ones you spend. So you spend all the regular colored ones first. But if you take damage, you have to discard a red thing from your board. So it's again, it's very intuitive because it's just pick a red thing, and mechanically does the same thing.
Actually, this kind of leads to maybe what'll be the rest of this conversation. So one thing that David and I really needed you for is to fully evoke the fact that this is a game about women specifically doing night raids. So as a deliberate choice on our end, we wanted to keep the gameplay pretty straightforward. Like, I was joking with somebody the other day that, oh yeah, it's my first game. It's a World War II hex and counter game.
Yeah.
And so, one of the comments that I've gotten over time are things like, oh, well, I want to feel like a female pilot, or why isn't there more sexism in here? Or, but the gameplay itself, we wanted to sort of emphasize the professionalism and skill of the women. But that means that the fact that they are women and like the historical context has to come out a lot through the art. So what are some choices that you're making to kind of help bring out who these people are in the midst also of all the things that they're doing?
Yeah, for me, this is actually a very challenging part of, probably the most challenging part. Like all of the stuff that we've been talking about, the UI stuff, the graphics, that's kind of bread and butter for me, but representing real people, I mean, we're not representing real people directly.
This is not like biographical.
In Night Witches. Yeah. Exactly. But they're representative of real people. I've done a little bit of that in games, but not in any way in like Night Witches. It's very tricky because for me, there's a very fine line to, and we went back and forward on the cover art a little bit, for instance, and it was really trying to thread the needle between making the women seem like real people who had lives and because we looked at photographs a lot, right? We looked at photographs of the real people a lot, and we were struck by the liveliness of the photographs, right? There's lots of personality that comes across in the photographs, and it's not just the case that like everyone's smiling and looks happy, because that's not the truth, right? There's times when they look exhausted and they look tired, but there are also lots of photographs where they're joking around and kind of messing around. And I think it's easy for war games to be very austere, to kind of shy away from showing, and it's not even a lighter side of people. It's just trying to represent them as full people as much as possible. And I think also from a player point of view, it's important, I think, to the experience of the game, especially since this is a campaign. Do you describe it as a campaign game? I guess we would, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, well, it's a game of multiple missions that you work through.
Yeah, I think our expectation is that most people are going to play it that way. I mean, you don't have to, but that's the expectation. Yeah.
Yeah, let's go with a tastefully short campaign game.
Yeah. So there is a real sense, if you do play it like that, that there's you have so mechanically speaking, that you have a finite number of crew, right? And when you're playing, when a plane gets downed, you lose that crew and they're gone. They're gone forever. So that's really a sort of thematic point that you need to sort of emphasize, because mechanically it's very simple. And that's something that could be represented in an infinite number of ways, from a UI or art standpoint. But I think for all of us, it's very important that we kind of try and put some weight into that, because it could be a very slight thing mechanically, because it's just a thing that happens if something happens. So yeah, this is a very long-winded way of saying that. It's kind of a balancing act, which is very tricky, of seriousness is the wrong word, but seriousness, and it's not being flippant, I think, is really the key of it. So trying to show them as real people. We also are taking the opportunity to show them not during missions, right? So having, these were two-person crews who would have worked together a lot, would have gone through a lot together. So trying to show that bond a little bit, trying to suggest that that's a very strong bond, and but also just not trying to show them in a state of misery the whole time, right? Because but also not trying to show them laughing and joking the whole time, because obviously neither of those two things is the truth. So yeah, as much as possible, just trying to get across the idea that there were actual characters and actual people. So one of the ways that we're doing that is the crew cards, which mechanically represent each card is a crew, so two women. There's two sides to each of those cards. One of them represents them kind of having a moment off mission, right? So between missions, whether they're, and this is something I'm still working on because I'm actually finding it very difficult. Playing cards and just hanging out and looking at charts and that sort of stuff, and having a smoke and kind of casual moments. But then the flip side of that card is those two same women actually in the cockpit. And when you start the mission, you take one of those cards and you flip it over and you put them into the cockpit. So there is a kind of a again, ritual is the wrong word, but you do kind of have this sense of, okay, we're getting ready, we're leaving this more casual. It's this, we're getting serious now. This is okay. Right. We're going on the mission. We're going to work, I guess, right? Yeah. So that's one of the ways. The cover art is another way. The women are very prominent on the cover art. We've talked a lot about the player board showcasing the plane and putting things onto the plane and all that sort of stuff. But this is not a game about planes, right? It's not. That's not the point of it. I don't know, but I don't think you guys decided to make it because you love planes so much. So
definitely not.
Right. While we do represent that, it was really important to have that aspect of this is. It's not just a generic crew on the plane. It's the crew that you're taking, and it's the crew that is at risk that's on this plane.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to just kind of pull that string. One other comment is, it's super common in games to have character cards, and those character cards have all kind of abilities or special powers or whatever, blah, blah, blah. just to be clear, these cards have nothing on them but the crew. Like, they don't actually have a game mechanic purpose other than to represent your sort of like quote unquote lives for the campaign. And I think that's a really powerful message, right? That the game is conveying, is that like this is their singular function, right?
Right. Yeah. And that's something that came from you guys. So you did originally have, I mean, the fact that the crew were represented by cards and not, you know, a track or something, you know, again, all these other ways that it could be represented. You know, that's something that I didn't come up with. But again, you know, okay, well, we have these, which is very rare. You're right, David, that we have these cards that are just there to represent something thematically. And again, there is a mechanical aspect to it, but there's no UI on the cards. There's no icons. There's no anything like that. So it's definitely an opportunity to use what we have there to pull as much theme out of it as possible. So that's, again, sort of looking at what we have. Okay, we're going to use cards for these. That works great. What else can we do to maximize the effect of that component?
The other thing that's been kind of fun is that it's beyond just components. Like, it's also in, like, I guess, fonts and layout. So, you know, I wrote flavor text for each of the missions. Sorry, everyone. And one thing that ended up being kind of fun is that in your version of the layout, there's like the mission text, which is in like a more professional typewritery font. And then you change the flavor text to first person, picked a more handwriting style font, and then turned it into like a kind of diary.
Yes, I forgot that I did change it to first person. Yes, yeah, because it was in a
like second person.
It was in second person. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That just, you know, the map board, or certainly the left hand side of it, is very much like an operations planning. That's where all your UI is basically. And all of your mission information. So it's like a briefing station, kind of, right? And we see scraps of paper and maps and photographs and reconnaissance and all that sort of stuff in the background. But the main meat of it is the mission specific rules, which are kind of almost on a flashcards, I guess. And then in sort of behind that and around that, in the form of like a letter, a handwritten letter, is kind of the or a diary, I guess. Yeah, is the flavor text. Yeah, that little change just made the most sense to me, to try and put you in that position.
I've also been enjoying seeing a couple different drafts of the maps where you're trying to find the most legible handwriting font.
Oh my god, it's the worst.
And I can tell that this is a challenge.
It's the worst. Oh my god.
I can just handwrite it and you can scan it and then no one can read it.
I actually, at one point I did. I mean, I've got terrible handwriting too, but I was thinking, who do I know that has like consistent legible handwriting? The answer is nobody these days. But yes, a typeface that looks convincing but also legible is a tricky thing to find.
Yeah.
Have you all ever heard people say that like the best anti-car theft device is a manual transmission, right?
Yeah.
I feel like in the future, cursive is going to be the way that like you can keep all your documents secret, because if you write in cursive, nobody can read it now. It's like,
Yeah.
One day there will be classes about learning to read modern handwriting. So when I was in grad school, I took papyrology class, which was literally trying to figure out how to read ancient people's bad Latin and Greek handwriting.
Wow.
On documents that we have. Like, they literally train you to do it. And there are people whose entire specialty is reading ugly handwriting from the ancient world. Wow. So just so y'all know, fair warning, it's probably going to happen to those of us whose documents survive beyond our lifetimes.
Wow, those people are going to be busy. They're going to have a lot of stuff to translate. Yeah, but I mean, typefaces, especially in a historical game, choices of typefaces are very important, and also just a very useful tool for, again, evoking certain ideas, because we're all used. I mean, a lot of people have a lot of reference points for, if not war games, war movies or books or comics or whatever. You kind of know the paraphernalia through osmosis.
Yeah.
So you can do a lot of work with very little in some cases. Just a couple of choices.
So I just want to flag this because I don't think we've talked about this in public. But one of the art requests that David and I had for you was that we didn't want anything that looks like kind of faux Russian propaganda. Like if you look at a lot of covers of like the Night Witches graphic novel and stuff like that, it's like red. There's like kind of faux Cyrillic lettering.
Right.
Lots of motherland kind of stuff.
Sure.
Did you find that request liberating, or did it make it like there are things that you couldn't use? I actually don't know.
It certainly wasn't a problem at all. I don't think there's any chance I would have myself gone down that road anyway. In fact, the best thing about it was we were on the same page. It would have been more awkward, I think, if you were like, "We love this," and sending me 1,000 things from Pinterest, which is just all people looking at, pointing, and the typical sort of Soviet poster thing. It doesn't ring true to me in this context at all, because when I look at the documentation and stuff, and obviously there's the lettering and stuff is there, but it's very matter of fact. Military stuff is it's pretty straight down the line. They're not, for the most part. You do have propaganda posters, obviously, but that's not what these women would have been looking at before their missions. They're already there. The job is done. So yeah, that would have felt very. It just wouldn't have felt authentic at all to me, and also for the cover, I think. I think there's a danger of, especially with representing real conflicts. I think there's a danger of falling back on iconography, visual iconography, and I think often that iconography is based in things like propaganda, and it's not based in truth, because propaganda is often by nature not based in truth. So yeah, I don't think I would ever really use something like that unless it was literally a game about propaganda, in which case it would be appropriate to use. But if we're talking about real people in real situations, and trying to kind of talk about what that was like in some way, an approach like that just wouldn't make any sense to me. So yeah, that was a very good early, like, we're on the same wavelength.
Actually, we have to go back and change it all. No, I'm kidding.
No.
So did you feel that? Okay, so here's a question. You did a lot of research. Where did you take liberties, if you did, with historicity, with accuracy, and under what circumstances do you do that?
So a lot of liberties, just because we have to. I mean, there's only a certain amount of research that you can realistically do. You guys do want the game to be finished at some point. And also, it is a game, so it needs to function as a game. It needs to actually work as a game. So I areas where I took license. I mean, the maps, to an extent. I did, I think, probably more than a standard due diligence of trying to make sure it was right. But at the end of the day, some of it was like, well, this is as close as I can get, and I think it's close enough. And it's not all, obviously it's not all 100% accurate. It can't ever be. Certainly in certain aspects of the UI itself. I mean, there are parts where, so especially in the map book, on the left-hand page, there's kind of a breakdown of the phases of the game that kind of brings you through how to play, essentially. And that's very, obviously, that's just modern board game UI. It's not, there's not a lot of thematic stuff going on there at all, because it's just not the place for it. So there's a lot of stuff like that. But as much as possible, where the information was available and where I could get it. For instance, the plane model is accurate. The uniforms are accurate. Stuff where we have a lot of visual reference. I think Raina. It is Raina. It is Raina. Yes.
It's Raina. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't want to use wrong. Sent me the actual user manual for the plane, which was incredible. I never thought to look for the user manual for the plane. And she's like, oh, because I was looking at one point, I was looking at what the inside of the cockpit looks like, and it's very difficult to figure out what models they would have used, and there's lots of variation. And she was just like, oh, I have the user manual here. I was like, what?
You can always trust Rita to have just the right thing.
Yeah. So on mission 1, in the background under some of the paper, there's actually a section of the user manual. Which shows the cockpit, because I kind of thought, it's their first mission, maybe they're still brushing up on how to use these planes.
Oh man, that's good.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the answer is lots of liberties. There's lots of this kind of fits visually. A lot of the times it's making sure stuff isn't blatantly inaccurate. Right, you can go so far with accuracy, and sometimes there's reference available, and sometimes there isn't. But it's really, for the most part, just making sure that stuff isn't like wildly inaccurate.
So here's a question for you. Now that we can actually talk about this with a common game between us, what kinds of attachments do you develop to games that you do the art for? Because I feel like you do so many. But when you do you like to play games where you've done the artwork? Do you develop an attachment to each game that you do, or is it just kind of like, yeah, I did it and it's out the door?
No, I do. I don't mind playing stuff that I've worked on, because usually by the time it actually arrives and is manufactured, I've kind of let go of the trauma of making that game. It's all forgotten and it's all roses and it's all fun. I don't mind doing that. It is actually the first play of a game I worked on tends to be quite stressful, because I'm always expecting to find a mistake. Anyone who's played their own game, I think, will recognize that feeling.
Oh, like, every time I pull Night Witches out for a demo, and it's been a while, every time I'm like, what if it's actually terrible and I didn't know?
Yeah. But I mean, I'm lucky enough to, for the most part, work on the types of games that I like to play. I'm a fairly broad game player anyway. And I'm lucky enough to have, to be able to choose to some extent the stuff that I work on. So yeah, I mean, in some way, the attachment kind of starts before I start to work on it, because often it's thematic, or it's based on the people who are making it, both of which was the case here. Or so yeah, there's definitely some level of attachment. I would find it really hard if I didn't care about the game at all. Honestly, I would find it so hard, because I do. I don't want to spend so long making something that I don't think matters. That would just be very sad for me. And more, actually, in the current climate, let's just say, of being an artist in the world, I don't want to spend time flippantly making things that don't matter. So yeah, very much so. I try to work on things that have some sort of pull for me.
I want to ask a follow-up question related to that then. You reached out to us about this. I think you actually reached out just to say, hey, I'd be interested in play testing. You didn't even,
Right.
And so what was it about this that interested you and prompted you to reach out?
Well, I knew the story of the Night Witches. I knew what it was about. I have an interest in military history. I'm not like a military history buff or anything, but I do have an interest in it. I also have an interest in aviation. So it was just lots of different things. I hadn't come across a game, because there wasn't one to my knowledge, that is based on that particular story. I have there was just a lot of things that it kind of piqued my interest. Solo game. I'm not a not a huge solo gamer, but I love the idea of solo games. No, I know. I'm so sorry. But I love the idea. I love the notion of playing solo games. I just tend not to find the time to play any games these days. But so Nemo's War was a similar thing. Nemo's War, I actually had the original edition, but as soon as I heard that they were making that, I did the same thing. I wrote to them and I was like, can I be a part of this somehow? Because that's a good example of another game that hit a lot of different interest points for me, and Night Witches was another one of those. And I think so. There are so many games being developed these days, and often the thing that pulls me towards a project is the people. Sometimes it's the theme, but often it's the people. And I'm not saying it wasn't the people in this case, but
we're terrible. It's fine.
Yeah. But it's not that often that a theme really jumps out. That it's hard to make a game because there's so many now with a very distinctive theme that's very interesting and kind of captures your attention and your imagination. So yeah.
I'm very glad the Night Witches was one of those for you. So here's kind of like a more technical, worky question. So, this is my first design. So, this has been like an interesting ride for me just overall. But, when David and I turned all of our materials over to you, I spent a lot of time thinking about obviously because I'm working with David, I know we did it right. But for people who are working with board game artists, what can we do on our end to make your part of the job as easy as possible?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. Night Witch was very smooth, except again that I played the wrong mission. That's on me. Maybe make the mission numbers bigger. I don't know.
You can do that.
Yeah. No, Night Witches was very smooth. The rules were in a good. That's really the big thing. The rules were in a good state. I was able to read it and understand how to play. And we went. There was a couple of questions here and there, but really not very much at all. Having the rules at a state, it's often the case where the rule book writing comes later in the process. The game is designed and rules are there and people know the rules, but they might not be written in a way that somebody who doesn't know the rules can understand. That makes things difficult because it slows everything down. So especially when I'm in like UI development brain mode, it's a very specific mindset for me to get into, and I kind of need to hold all the rules in my head at one point, at one stage, because you need to understand the relationships, and if you make a change here, does it mess up something else somewhere else? And Night Witches isn't a hugely complicated game, but some of the games I work on are, and that can be a very heady thing you need to do. It's a real focus. It's a real focus task. And if you run into roadblocks with, oh, hang on, I don't understand how this works, or I need to check this, it's not in the rules, so I need to go back to the designer. All this stuff really breaks that flow up. So it just protracts the process. So yeah, definitely a rule book is the big one. That's really it, honestly. I mean, it's better for me if it's not covered in images already. It doesn't really matter, but it's just kind of, I don't need to worry about like as clean a prototype as possible is better for me.
That's really interesting because I feel like a lot of people feel pressure to dress up their prototypes.
Yeah, just
they're like, oh, it needs placeholder art. Oh, let's.
Yeah.
So, what about a blink makes it better?
Well, for I mean, it's just it can be like a haze to get through. Like a fog that I need to get through, because what I need to do is strip everything away and just understand what are the component parts of this game. Because the first thing that I usually do is I just remake the game with boxes and circles and, you know, a very, very basic rudimentary. This is where this goes. This is where that goes. And there's no icons or anything. It's just like text, and it doesn't look like anything at all. But it's essentially like a mind map for the game, almost mechanical mind map. And that's the most useful state that a game can be in for me, because then I can see the relationships of how everything works together, and I can move things around and take things out and strip it apart and understand without any other paraphernalia on top, which is just a distraction. So if it's there, I'm gonna have to take it out. So, you know,
save everybody the time.
Just leave it out. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I understand the impulse, because, you know, it's probably easier to get play testers. Maybe I don't know. Some publishers, you know, maybe will be more excited if something has a picture on it or something. Maybe, you know, that's not my end of it, but certainly for me, it's always nice to see just the flat colors is all I need.
This is encouraging because all the stuff I make is ugly. Just very plain, just zero frills.
That's absolutely perfect. Yeah.
So you alluded to this earlier in the conversation, and you know what? I'm just gonna go there. So we are in economically weird times, but we're also at a time when, you know, AI everything. I am a noted AI hater, and I'm not changing that position. But I want to emphasize at the end of this conversation, because it's my soapbox and we can, that I don't think that we could have come to anything that looks remotely as good or is as well thought out graphically without a human expert to do it. Because you made sometimes mechanical decisions about our game and how it should work in order to express it well. There are player aids, there are symbols that really communicate how things work. I just don't see a world where that is replaceable with something that's not a person.
Yeah. This is my favorite subject. Yeah, so it's certainly, like when talking about UI and graphic design, you know, it's different for a lot, not really for me, but for a lot of people, it's different than talking about illustration, right, as two distinct things. I think certainly the process that we went through for Night Witches, for instance, with all the things we've been talking about, with trying to emphasize thematic and emotional elements, you know, they're human decisions, and they've come from us being human and understand that we're talking about humans, and humans are going to play this. And that's not something you can simulate. You just have, that's an empathetic, emotional process that you need to go through. So certainly from that point of view, definitely not. It kind of comes back to what I was saying about work that matters as well. And you know, I'm not trying to prop myself up and saying, you know, everything I do is filled with profound meaning or anything like that. But when it comes to work that I respond to, and that means something to me, the process that is undertaken to create that work is probably 90% of the reason why I respond to it. You know, the work itself is the work itself, and we can all enjoy that, and you know, that's great. But the process that somebody went through to create it, whether or not it's apparent in the work itself, often it's not. We've kind of talked about that a little bit with some of the aspects of Night Witches. Some people may never notice, right? But I still think it matters. I still think there's a there is a, oh God, what's his name? There's a famous character actor, and he's in Groundhog Day, and I cannot remember his name. Oh my God. Anyway, he's a fantastic, his name will come to me in a second. He's a fantastic storyteller. And one of the phrases that he used that has always stuck with me is there's blood in the work. You know when there's blood in the work, which basically means that you know when somebody has put something of themselves into the work. And you know when they haven't, right? It's usually pretty obvious when people are phoning stuff in. So I don't think that can be replaced. I think the danger with any sort of I think it's apparent from all of the discourse that's going on that not many people understand how generative AI works. I think that's very apparent. that a lot of people don't understand, or don't care to understand, or whatever, but fundamentally don't understand how it works. So I think there's really an aspect of us surrendering our intent to something that we don't understand, and just accepting what comes out because we couldn't do it, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the what we can and can't do for me is far less important than the the why. And a lot of people, I think, just don't understand the why because they don't understand how the thing works. And even if you do understand how the thing works, the why is still a mystery because you know what you get is whatever. So yeah, I think, you know, sorry, I'm rambling a lot. This is a big subject.
I invited this.
It's a big subject. From my point of view, like if somebody can't have been bothered to go through a process to make something and give it the thought and the time, and it is really time that people that it deserves and that it requires, then why should I give a crap about it? You know, if you can't be bothered to.
One of my most common like late stage teacherisms that I was saying before I left the classroom is, why would I be bothered to read something you couldn't be bothered to write?
Yes, that's a much more succinct way of saying it. Yes, yes, 100%. Yeah, what's it worth? You know, if it's just worth it because we needed to make something, and now here's a thing, and there's another thing, you know, who cares about that thing? Nobody cares about it. So you know, why are we making it?
Yeah. One thing I'm very glad that I can say then is that fortunately it's not a biohazard, but however people receive Night Witches, there's a lot of blood in the work on all ends. And I'm really glad that we all have been through this process together.
Yeah, me too.
So I'm going to cut us here because it's been about an hour. David, I know you need to go to work. But gentlemen, I want to thank both of you so much for coming on, and actually like for kind of like having this whole process. I feel like, you know, over the course of years, like we've been kind of documenting and looking at stuff about Night Witches, and at 85%, you know, I guess we're getting close, hopefully. So
we are.
All right. So just some light questions at the end. So Ian, I know you've been busy. Have you played anything that was fun recently?
I haven't played a game that's new to me that I haven't been working on in months, honestly. So my diet is like little short games like Nova Luna or a Castles of Burgundy or something like that, which is fun. I played Bonfire recently. I love Bonfire, but I'm not in a new games place at the moment.
David, you play anything fun?
I think. Well, I would say that the standout for me is not a new game. I've been playing Maria again. So 15-year-old game.
Good.
But
Can we please play this the next time we're together? I really need to play Maria.
Yeah, it's also in
Maria's
Rally. It's also
so
in
good.
Rally the Troops, which I'm not a big online gamer, but that's maybe what we should schedule.
Yeah,
one of my all-time favorites. So that's what I've been playing lately. Again, always
amazing. I have been in 2 big online games of Virgin Queen, and here I stand. I'm like doing the Ed Beach thing right now. So I'm the Protestants, and here I stand. And then because they wanted me to learn as much as possible immediately, in my very first game of Virgin Queen, I'm trying to figure out how to make it work as Spain, and I think I'm going to die. But but I'm having a great time doing it. So. And then if people want to find y'all online, where do you like to be found?
David?
So for me, probably Blue Sky. It's D. Jack Thompson or Board Game Geek, and you can just find me by going to one of my games and finding my geek mail that way.
I am also on Blue Sky and Instagram, and I have a website which is just enotool.com, and I'm also on Board Game Geek sometimes.
Excellent. I am Beyond Solitaire everywhere, for those of you who did not know that. And once again, guys, we really appreciate you being here. It's been really good to have this chat.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And congratulations on the Golden Geek.
That's right.
Yeah. So a few episodes ago, this was certified as the best podcast, no longer second best. So yes, also super both of y'all contributed to that because you've both guested in previous episodes. So I mean, it's really our Golden Geek.
We'll take credit. It's actually it's ours.
Right.
We'll let you share it with us. That's fine.
Fantastic. All right, everybody. Please like, subscribe, comment, ask questions, and most of all, happy gaming.